the in general, not to stereotype artists or anybody, but in general, a lot of people who are turning out to be these hacks are people who never really had to try very hard in their lives.
Yeah, well, if they're not being held, if the high jump is only 4 inches off the ground, and you're being told that that's valid, how prepared are you going to be when you come up against people who've been high jumping 6.5 feet off the ground? And the same's true in art. I mean, if the Art Institute is raising up painters to think that absolutely anything they do is valid, then that's like patting the kids on the head in the Special Olympics. Be like, that's really great, you ran the wrong direction, but the only thing that really matters is that you try.
The millennials.
Yeah. And so I think that what's happened is, like, art has been turned into an easy A. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, it's okay. Sometimes you got to break rules.
I was looking at that green light.
The
People are now looking at us.
Hey, well, sometimes you got to break rules to get people's attention. And nothing illustrates that more than casually running a red light in front of people who are stuck behind it.
We did it very casually, too.
Yes, it's very like, you know what, we are entitled to break these rules.
I don't know about that.
Well, you are if you don't get arrested. But I mean, you're not. I'm not saying that anybody's ever entitled to break the law. They're not. I mean, that's not right. I'm not advocating that. That's me being a bit sarcastic and flippant, But I'm being honest in saying that if you want to get people's attention, sometimes you break the rules. But you have to suffer the consequences of breaking the rules. There's no denying that.
Well, I mean, there's another saying in the TV world that you have to know the rules before you can break them.
Right.
And somebody once told me, and maybe this is a bad example, but there's a lot of people who look upon something like what Pablo Picasso did is like, oh my God, my 3-year-old could do that. I always hear that kind of, and I'm like, no, your 3-year-old could not do that. And look at his early stuff. He was actually a master of what he did.
Well, and then, there was a lot, when Cubism came into being. What was being discovered just then is X-ray diffusion through crystals. And what people started to realize, like when you condense viruses in a precipitate, they form crystals. Like, okay, so all this new information was being discovered about crystals. And what artists absorbed out of that was this idea that the world beneath the world that we ordinarily see is crystalline. And that made its way into the Cubist art. It wasn't like Cubism sprung up just out of a need to diverge from normal tendencies in art. Cubism was a reaction to science, to what was happening in the science of the day.
Okay, later, guys.
Yeah, I couldn't handle it. Too negative.
No, that's the problem with this slow internet connection. I think sometimes people are talking.
They don't realize that we're talking to them because we're behind.
Yeah, well, it's completely out of sync. And great thing about this is it archives.
Yeah, and I mean, so in the beginning, there will probably be fewer viewers. But as time goes by, more and more people will tune into it, especially, potentially, to see that they're being referenced. And that's one of the things, it's like talking about David Ford, talking about Peregrine Honig, talking about Stretch. These are the people who are widely known in our community.
I mean, local Kansas City artists who are,
Yeah, I mean, in a tightly focused group of people in the art scene, which I kind of swim in and out of. I mean, I consider myself more in the sciences than in art. But I believe that art ought to be treated as the sciences. You don't just go in and, you can't go into a mathematics department and be like, wow, I just invented a new meaning for the square root sign. It's like, no, that's not how it goes. I mean, you can do that, but you'd better create proofs and show how it works.
But that implies a disciplined approach.
Well, it implies, like in art, what's the stability of your medium? Are you creating art that's going to last 5 years? Are you creating art that's going to last 50 years? Do you even have the capacity to understand that conversation? Because art has become the default study of people who have no talent in anything else. Exactly. And I mean, a lot of people would argue with me on that point, but
I would not argue. I've seen it firsthand. It's one of the reasons why I got discouraged with being an artist and wanting to make art, and started looking for other things because I was like, hey, I'm not going to be able to make a living. And I'm not like a lot of people, or I guess I'm like most people. kind of cower in fear. I admire people who can actually go, well, I'm going to be bold and I'm going to live without an actual real job and just kind of live by my wits and make what I can and live off that. I mean, you know, it's the difference between the corporate person and the non-corporate person. The corporate person needs that cushion, that comfort. And unfortunately, I haven't made that bridge from being a corporate person to a non-corporate.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, a lot of that conversation centers on overhead.
Yeah.
If you control the amount of overhead that you have, and I think that a lot of artists focus on this without realizing that it's central. Because again, I don't know that a lot of artists explore very deep. I think a lot of it's superficial. But the thing is that if you control your overhead is like load on an engine. You have to produce as much torque as you have a load to pull.
Going on the foundation.
Yeah. They have some pretty good shows there. There's been a lot of drama there too lately with the change in the guard or whatever.
I don't know what to make of that because a lot of people I've talked with have said that some of the people who are forcing the change are the bad guys.
You know what happens, and I've seen it. This is my experience with venues. They start to become, they fall out of favor, right? People quit going there. It gets real crazy. I saw this 5 years ago when there were some people running it that were kind of thuggish, and it wasn't really the same. Maybe 7 years ago. And then this lady, I don't know her name.
Betty Pro.
Yeah, she kind of took it over. The place got a different feel to it. Started to build up again. Big clientele. It's had some real primo acts coming in all the time. Well, you know what? As soon as it becomes popular again, that's when people come in. They start vying for position, right? They're like, you know, I want a piece of this pie. This is about me. And, you know, and if I were her, I'd just be like, you know, you get tired of it after a while because the point isn't to fight those people. The point is to make the place relevant. And so if you make the place relevant, then you have to start dealing with all the internal politics and the thing like implodes because people become jealous and angry, self-absorbed.
Plus, there was some money thrown in the mix, and from what I understand, the money was what spoiled a lot of things.
Well, a lot of times it does.
Especially government money.
Well, that I don't know how to finance.
It's like $143,000 grant procured by Emanuel Cleaver III, senator.
Oh.
And it was for something to do with historic preservation. And especially in Kansas City politics, there are a lot of groups who are so used to money being funneled in, and they know the grant system, they know how to play the system so well that this money comes in and spoils everything, essentially, you know, because there are literally people who make a living off of this money.
Yeah, they're kind of vampires on the system, in my opinion, but, I mean... that's what
Alexander Austin there.
Oh, right on. I know that's one of Steph Leedy's buildings.
I just profiled. Oh, really?
Yeah. Or it was the last time I knew.
And that's another thing, too. These artists are coming into these parts of town. Again, you know, I couldn't make that big an investment in this area, and I wish I could. But artists are coming in, and now you can't touch any of this property for anything even approaching reasonable, and it's all because artists have come in and have done a lot of the legwork.
Right, and one of the best ways to get rid of artists is just to have the property taxes drive them out. I mean, there becomes a point in time, again, overhead, the amount of torque you have to produce to pull a heavy load. When the load is light, you have to dedicate a lot less of your energy to maintaining that load.
That big space you need for your art, or to make your art behind closed doors.
Yeah, well, that becomes relatively expensive if you want the big space. I mean, the thing is, and what I've advocated this for a long time, is that you get a lot more, there are economies of scale. When you're acting as a single actor in the system, then you have very limited range and limited power. But when you get two people, there's that old expression, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's meaningful because it's true in economics. When you start to get 5 people working cooperatively, they can buy an entire building. You get 50 people working together, you can start to buy a city block. But you can't do that as an individual, or you might be able to do that as an individual, but you don't feel, you don't achieve the benefit of working in a phalanx, you know? I mean, like, But we have this Rambo mentality that everybody needs to kind of be operating on their own, and we have this superstar mentality that it's all just this one person who's out there with a sword conquering the world. And it's been the most difficult thing for me to find groups of people to work with. I have not been able to find groups that remain cohesive. Once the system becomes successful, the group breaks down, and individual egos rise to the fore.
Well, I think as far as that, and I've had the same issue. What I'd like to find is team. Like not groups of people who are all doing the same thing, but everybody who's doing something a little bit different. Like I'm doing this, and you're doing your stuff, and we work together to do something else. As opposed to like a bunch of oil painters who get together and just want to do the same thing.
Right. Well, structure is a lot of times anathema to creative people. But what I like, my default position is that okay, if I do things in a group setting, we go downtown and we form an LLC, and then our operating agreement delineates exactly what everyone's responsible for.
Yeah.
And when an individual fails to meet those criteria, then they will not receive the benefit of the cooperative dynamic. And that is the only thing that I've found that really keeps people working.
Have you learned that the hard way?
Yeah, I've learned that the incredibly hard way. I mean, the stray cat, the fourth estate. Like I've done